folks join, I think they'll know that it's recorded.
Great. All right, well, hi everyone. Welcome to our final webinar series in our Domestic Violence Awareness Month campaign focused on political education, which is entitled Inform Your Vote. And this final webinar will be focusing on what to expect on your ballot and specifically talking about various statewide ballot measures and local ballot measures that you'll likely be seeing. And my name is Nashi Gunasekara, and I'm the Senior Policy Advocate at Family Violence Law Center. And I'll pass it to my co-host to introduce herself.
And I'm also Laura McInnes. I'm a Senior Staff Attorney at FVLC. And we're just doing this this series together. So I think Nashi, you want to start the next slide?
Sounds good. So the agenda for today is we're gonna just briefly go over an introduction, again, just grounding us in what this webinar series is about, and just emphasizing why your vote is particularly important in this upcoming midterm election. We'll go over some brief vocabulary that you might have heard or just caught wind of in light of the midterm elections being a popular topic of discourse lately. We'll review some statewide measures and local measures. What we're covering is not a comprehensive list. We've just cherry-picked a few that we wanted to talk about. And then we'll conclude with some resources that you can visit and rely on to find trustworthy, bipartisan information to help inform your vote for these same measures that we're talking about, but other measures that might be on your ballot. So the introduction. This year, FVLC, like I said, is celebrating or honoring rather Domestic Violence Awareness Month with this political education campaign. And this campaign is really to engage voters using specifically a gender-based violence lens to kind of analyze and understand what it means to vote with that lens when you're looking at different candidates and measures. And specifically kind of centering the values of survivor agency, racial justice, economic independence, and anti-oppression. And just to be clear, your vote always matters in midterm elections, in big time presidential elections, but particularly during midterm elections, because people often don't turn out in mass for non-presidential elections, but sometimes that's where the biggest impact happens. So this Inform Your Vote webinar, like I said before, it will specifically focus on a few state and local ballot measures you can expect to see on your ballot this November. And then, of course, where you can go to find more information to help you prepare for November 8th. All right, so this is where we'll get into a little bit of vocabulary. So an initiative statute is basically an amendment to existing state law. And to get on the ballot, you need a petition of signatures of California voters that amount to about 5% of the total voters for the most recent governor election. So say the, I shouldn't even be doing this because I'm terrible at math, but say there were 1,000 voters for the most recent governor election, 5% of that is, oh my gosh, 50, am I right? Is 50. And so that is technically the amount that you would need to get on the California state ballot to be eligible. And then to pass the initiative statute, you would need a simple majority of the vote, which is just 50% of the vote plus one more. A referendum is a change or an amendment to all or parts of an existing law. To get on the ballot, you need a petition of eligible California voters' signatures that amount to about 5% of the total voters for the most recently passed governor election. And then again, to pass, it's just a simple majority. A constitutional amendment, it has a bit of a higher barrier. It is kind of what it sounds. It's a change or an amendment to our California state constitution. To get on the ballot, you need 8% of that same pool of voters to be eligible and get on the next ballot. And to pass, you need a simple majority. An initiative is just a brand new law or constitutional amendment that's voted on by the people. So it's kind of this umbrella term that we use to talk about the other smaller categories of things that we're voting on. So a referendum, an amendment, and a statute, etc. And then proposition is also kind of an umbrella term used for any ballot measure to be voted on by people. So initiative, referendum, etc. And then finally, a recall. As California voters, we might recently remember the governor recall election of not too long ago. And that does have also a higher barrier. We need 12% of eligible California voter signatures of the pool of voters that voted for the last governor election to be eligible for to be seen on the ballot measures, or to be listed on the ballot. And then to pass, it's a simple majority. All right, so now we're going to move into statewide measures. All right, so California State Proposition 1 is really about enshrining reproductive freedom into the California Constitution. Specifically, this proposition would state that California cannot deny or interfere with a person's reproductive freedom, and that people have the fundamental right to choose whether or not to have an abortion and whether or not to use contraceptives. This proposition comes on the heels of the US Supreme Court decision to repeal Roe v. Wade, which essentially protected a person's right to have an abortion. And when it comes to reproductive justice, reproductive rights, and gender-based violence, there's a huge amount of overlap. Gender-based violence is about asserting control and power over another person on the basis of their gender. And we may be familiar with the ways in which the United States has similarly done that through laws, cultural practices, social norms, etc., from denying people the right to vote, from making it particularly difficult for people of marginalized identities to access healthcare, to people just being able to advocate for themselves in political elections. So when we think about the ways in which women and gender expansive people often have to fight extra hard to protect themselves and their existence and their health in both the public and private setting, this intersection becomes ever more important. Reproductive coercion is a form of gender-based violence in which someone interferes with somebody else's rights or choices around how they want to protect themselves against sexually transmitted infections, wants to prevent unintended pregnancies, and just to maintain their reproductive health. And so that could look like destroying someone's birth control, perhaps misinforming them about their reproductive health choices, preventing them from going to the doctors, etc. And so this proposition is specific. It's really important when we look at it from a gender-based violence lens and what we're seeing across the nation in terms of attacks on people's rights to exercise bodily autonomy, reproductive freedom, access to healthcare, etc. And I want to pass it on to Laura to share her insight as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nachi. That was a really good overview. I just wanted to kind of expand on sort of the legal nuances of this proposition, because there has been a lot of recent developments in the kind of legal stratosphere about abortion. There was the federal law that was the federal constitutional decision that essentially revoked Roe v. Wade earlier this year. I think a lot of people have, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what that means, but essentially it means that each state can basically pass their own laws as far as how to regulate abortion. In California, there has been legally sanctioned abortion rights, both through case law, through judicial interpretation and through state law. So this is actually, this proposition kind of just gives further protection to rights that we in California already have as far as the right to abortion. But I find it very notable that this proposition states that amends the Constitution to say that the state cannot deny or interfere with reproductive freedom in specific ways. But there is kind of a legal landscape in California that does generally protect rights to abortion. There are some obviously regulations and exceptions to that, but it's pretty expansive in California. But that could always change, as we've seen with federal law. You know, it can always change in the state as well. So this is actually just further kind of sanctioning of laws that we already have on the books. So I just want to add that. And I also wanted to tag on to Nashi's point about different ways that we see reproductive coercion and reproductive violence, especially at our agency. We see a lot of clients experiencing all kinds of reproductive violence in very broad ways. And, you know, certainly having protections for abortion and for contraception are helpful for people that, you know, want more expansive choices. Certainly it's a I would say it's necessary but not sufficient to, you know, to the broad needs that people have to access reproductive justice. But for example, you know, we have a lot of clients that experience a lot of rape and sexual assault in their marriages, you know, in other dating relationships, and they are often, you know, have unwanted pregnancies. There's a lot of miscarriages because of abuse, physical abuse, sometimes intentional miscarriages by the abusive partner. So, you know, when it comes to giving the people the right to have an abortion and to choose contraceptions, these are helpful choices that people can make, but it doesn't necessarily change the fact that a lot of people are still experiencing violence that's not going to, it's not going to give all the protection to people to have all the decision-making power, if that makes sense. So it's a great step, is what I'm kind of generally trying to say, but it's not necessarily the end of the road as far as reproductive violence or reproductive justice goes for everyone. And so I think that's generally what I wanted to say on that issue. So you can feel free to tag on to that if you want.
No, that was great. Thank you for providing some of the legal context and also emphasizing that you're exactly right. Like this is not this is not where the kind of fight and advocacy can end when it comes to reproductive freedom. This is a great necessary protection, but just like Laura said, not sufficient, but a great first step. So this next series of statewide measures that you're likely to see if you're planning on voting in California is Proposition 26 and 27. So we picked these because they're very similar, but there are some distinct differences that are important to know as a voter. So generally, both of these propositions get at legalizing sports betting at racetracks and tribal casinos. Specifically, Proposition 26 allows in-person sports betting at racetracks and tribal casinos, and it requires that racetracks and casinos that offer sports betting make certain payments to the state, such as support to state regulatory costs. This proposition also allows additional gambling, such as roulette, as at tribal casinos. And finally, it adds a new way to enforce certain state gambling laws. Proposition 27 also allows tribes or gambling companies to offer online sports betting. It requires tribes and gambling companies that offer online sports betting to make certain payments to the state for specific purposes, again, such as to support state regulatory costs, but also to address homelessness specifically. The proposition also creates a new online sports betting regulatory unit, and it finally provides a new way to reduce illegal online sports betting. So on the face of it, one explicit difference between the two is Proposition 27 also explicitly gets at online sports betting, which is different than physical in-person sports betting. But also, as you'll see, we'll start to walk through in the last column here some of the other key differences that may not be super apparent on the ballot. So Proposition 26 explicitly creates the California Sports Wagering Fund. This would be, as the proposition states, would be considered state revenues. And so the state can have discretion over how to spend those new state revenues. But one way in which the proposition explicitly states and intends for those state revenues to be directed, one of them is to calculate the minimum amount of spending for California K-12 schools and community colleges each year. So with increased state revenues that are likely to come and be generated by legalizing sports betting, we can maybe reasonably assume that the minimum amount would spent on K-12 schools and community colleges would rise. Also, a portion of the funds that would be administered to this CSWF would be to support state regulatory costs. And then beyond that, that's kind of what they acknowledge as like their priority expenditures from the fund. But then they do outline 15% for gambling addiction and mental health programs and grants, 15% for sports betting and gambling enforcement, and then 70% to the state general fund. So there is definitely a structure to the fund, which is important to note. And it's also important to note, Proposition 27 also does this, is that a proportion of the funds to be generated from bringing sports betting into the legal market would go towards gambling addiction and mental health programs. Some of us may know that sports betting and gambling disproportionately negatively affects Black and Brown and low-income communities. And so when we think about legalizing and normalizing sports betting in the legal market, just like, whether it's similar to the tobacco taxes going towards programs that support substance use programs, this is kind of mirroring that. We acknowledge that people have the autonomy and the choice to engage in the activities that they want, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge kind of these disproportionate impacts that they have and provide the support if people want to move away from those habits that may not be serving them any longer. So that's what I'll say about Prop 26. And then Prop 27 explicitly creates also a type of fund, the California Online Sports Betting Trust Fund. And the way they envision this structure is that there would also be a portion that supports state regulatory costs for the oversight of this proposition. But that explicitly 85% of the revenues to be gained from legalizing online sports betting would go to addressing homelessness and towards gambling addiction programs. And then 15% of the funds would go towards non-gaming tribes. So tribes where sports betting at racetracks or tribal casinos is not allowed. So the ways in which the funds are dedicated are distinct in each proposition, and also the scope of what types of sports betting is different for each proposition. So there's definitely a lot. This is a high level overview, and there are definitely a lot more intricacies to kind of sift through with these propositions, but these are some of the key differences that we've identified. Now we're going to move on to local measures. All right, I feel like I've been talking a lot, but this final measure that I'll be focusing on is one that Oakland City voters can expect to see, and that is Measure Q. The percentage needed to pass is a simple majority, so 50% of the voters plus one more. And the proposition specifically states or asks, shall the Measure Q, authorize the city of Oakland to develop, construct, or acquire, or assist the development of up to 13,000 low rent residential units in social housing projects within the city of Oakland for the purpose of providing affordable rental housing be adopted. So this is a really interesting one. If you live in Oakland or Alameda County, We are all likely aware of the homelessness crisis and the housing shortage that not only plagues the county and the city, but the state of California. And so this proposition is really attractive in the sense that it is specifically getting at low income, affordable, and deeply affordable housing units, which is something that has been an ongoing struggle for the state, city, and county to address for a long time. Currently, Oakland is experiencing, or around 5,000 people in Oakland are experiencing homelessness on any given night. And it has been said that about 13,000 low rent residential units are needed to meet meet the deficit and meet the deficit of affordable housing units that Oakland is currently experiencing, and to meet the state requirement of affordable housing units by 2031. So that provides a little bit of context as to where that 13,000 unit number is coming from. What's interesting to note is that this measure does not tie itself to any specific project or funding. So right now it's almost just a permission statement to allow the city of Oakland to do this. And to some people, this may seem like an empty promise, but this is really where community advocacy can come into play to advocate to stakeholders on what kind of funding and what kind of projects we want to be seen built out of this measure. But that is something that is important to note. And analyzing this from a gender-based violence lens, we know that gender-based violence is one of the leading causes of women and gender-expansive people's homelessness nationwide, and Oakland City is not an exception to that. We also know that housing is a critical foundational element to securing economic independence. And without housing stability and security, it's really difficult to make any other decision about your life when you're worried about where you're going to sleep at night. These issues of housing, homelessness, gender-based violence disproportionately, again, impact Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, women and gender-expansive people. So even though this measure doesn't allocate specific funding or doesn't allocate specific projects that maybe we would like to see to get a better picture of how this is going to materialize, this is an essential first step in kind of moving us towards the goal of ending homelessness, providing housing security for vulnerable populations, and really getting us to where we need to be as a state and a city and a county in terms of housing as a right, and housing, dignified housing as well. So that is what I'll say about Measure Q. And now I'm going to pass it on to Laura.
Thank you. That was great. So, you basically took the words out of my mouth as far as the gender-based violence analysis in housing. And so that's why I wanted to highlight a couple other local measures that kind of focused on housing. So Measure U is one of those, does require 2/3 of the voters to pass it. So we'll see if it passes, but basically it says, shall the measure to improve public safety invest in Oakland by creating affordable housing for Oaklanders, repaving streets to removing potholes, improving traffic and pedestrian safety, and updating fire stations and other public stations. Oh, we got a question in the chat. I'm going to finish this thing, and then if we can go back to the question later. By issuing $850 million in general obligation bonds, raising approximately $85 million annually while bonds are outstanding. So essentially, this does a lot of things. Essentially, it raises money for different kind of city infrastructure, including construction, safety, street safety, or traffic and pedestrian safety, etc. But there is a provision for affordable housing, and that is about $350 million. So the kind of backstory on this one is that I believe there was a measure a few years ago, Measure KK, that allocated some money for affordable housing and for other services in Oakland. And they did allocate, I want to say $100 million to affordable housing units, but they didn't meet their goal for the units that they provided. I think they got about 20% of their goal. So this measure is kind of intended to financially support more affordable housing in Oakland, which we obviously desperately need. And I also want to point out, statistically, there's been some research, estimated research. I don't know how accurate this research is, but that the homelessness population in Alameda County has increased in the last 3 years by almost 25%. And Oakland is particularly hard hit in Alameda County as well. And our homeless population has drastically increased in the last 3 years since the pandemic. So I just wanted to highlight this one because it provides the funding to acquire and to rehabilitate and construct affordable housing units in Oakland. And I think I would hope it's a no-brainer, but that is just something I wanted to highlight. Nashi, did we want to go over this question, or do we want to do it at the end? It's up to you.
Yeah, we can look at the question.
Okay. Does Measure Q prioritize low-income Oakland residents? Does the possibility that Alameda County will try to dump all the low-income housing into Oakland and not have a share of these residents among all the cities in Alameda County? It's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think regarding the possibility of Alameda County positioning all the low income rental units in Oakland. So I'm not sure because this is a city measure, I don't know exactly what the relationship between the county and the city might be, considering that this is a city measure. Maybe that's a point of advocacy. Like I said, there's no projects attached to this specific measure or funding. And so kind of the specific ways in which this, the 13,000 affordable housing units will materialize seems to be something that is up for potentially public input and advocacy. So yeah, the way that unfolds is yet to be seen and is yet to be defined. And to the first part of the question around does Measure Q, I'll just go back to it, prioritize low-income Oakland residents? I would say very much so, yes. When I was reading into it, it said that the idea behind Measure Q is to build low-income, very low-income, and extremely low-income units. So really getting at that wide gamut of not just barely affordable housing units, but extremely affordable housing units is a goal of Measure Q. Again, the specifics have yet to be defined, but again, I think that's where community advocacy and public input is going to be huge to direct the vision of Measure Q. I hope that answers your question. And Laura, do you have anything to add around that?
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. I haven't read up very closely about this one, but it sounded like it was prioritizing low income residential units. So I don't know, I guess we'll see how they decide to allocate it.
And then moving on to Measure V.
And this is the last one I just want to highlight. It's also a housing related one, which is it's going to make several changes to the city code if it's adopted. So it also requires a majority vote, and it says, shall the measure amending the just cause eviction ordinance to 1, prohibit no fault evictions of children and educators during the school year, 2, extend eviction protections to tenants in RVs, tiny homes, and newly constructed units, except during the first 10 years after issuance of the certificate of occupancy, 3, remove failure to sign a new lease as grounds for eviction, and 4, make other clarifying amendments be adopted. So basically it tightens tenant protections in a variety of different ways. The first one is to prohibit no fault evictions of children and educators during the school year. So in Oakland, there are general tenant protections for most residences, meaning the landlord has to have a reason for cause to evict someone. There's many different reasons for that, but there are some exemptions depending on what kind of housing unit it is, or depending on other kind of factors. So if they call the no fault eviction. So in essence, this kind of prohibits one of the ways to get around a cause eviction by preventing evictions of children and educators during the school year. And obviously, analyzing this from a gender-based violence analysis, we have many different clients and people that experience gender-based violence who are mothers, who are children, who are, parents, I should say. And to be evicted or to even obtain an eviction notice can destabilize a family, essentially. During the school year, that's just an additional hurdle to uprooting someone's life. If someone has to move their kids, the child's life is also destabilized in that way, because they have to, deal with concerns about losing their home, their family dynamic, and, where they're going to school in the middle of the year. So I think this first protection is tightening protections for stability with families at a time when they really need to be staying in their home. So that's the first measure. And then the second one is to extend eviction protections to tenants in RVs and certain other homes. And my understanding is that this wasn't really defined very well in the code before. So this just makes clear that eviction protections do apply to tenants in RVs and certain other types of residences that are not traditionally defined, which, extends protections to a lot of people. And we know that people that have been living in, who are people who have been considered homeless, a lot of them live in cars, RVs, other vehicles, and that's also been increasing in the last few years with the rise of homelessness in general. So I think the urgency to protect people that are, doing their best to stay where they need to stay is why this measure is being pushed right now. The third one is to remove the failure to sign a new lease as grounds for eviction. So that's one of the cause reasons that someone would be able to a landlord would be able to evict a tenant. And so the idea is that, if a tenant has concerns about a new lease, maybe they don't want to, stay there for another year. Maybe, they just want some more flexibility, or they don't want different terms. Can be a way to kind of guarantee that tenants have some flexibility on their living situation. So under state law, if they don't sign a lease, it would basically move to a month to month. And that's, basically just kind of removes that ability for a landlord to evict a tenant because of that. And then make other clarifying amendments. I think that's just kind of a catch-all. So that's kind of a push for Measure V. And, with the eviction moratorium in flux right now, and in Alameda County, it's been kind of the last frontier of keeping tenants in their homes and keeping the evictions out. I think there's been kind of a bigger push to protect tenants as much as possible at this time, because it has been, we have had increasing rates of homelessness, especially in Oakland, and we want to prevent that as much as possible. Anything else you want to say about that, Nashi?
Just that I'll add, one of the biggest reasons that have been identified as California's increasing rate of homelessness is that people are falling into homelessness, obviously faster at the rate that they're being housed. And one of the easiest, most cost-effective, and in some ways stabilizing ways to prevent the trauma and prevent of being homeless and preventing the increase in homelessness is to just keep people housed. And so this measure, preventing unnecessary evictions, or just providing more tenant protections, I should just say that, is a really strong way to kind of field against some of those consequences that we're seeing play out, especially in light of the eviction moratorium that may or may not be in existence for much longer, who knows. So this provides kind of that added level of a safety net for tenants. All right, and so that kind of wraps up our overview of different ballot measures. We just wanted to end with some resources that we found really helpful in our research, but have proved really helpful for our colleagues and friends and families. So if you want to do some more research on statewide measures in California, the Legislative Analyst's Office is a really great resource to find information on the context of a certain measure, what it means to vote yes or no on a ballot measure, and the fiscal impacts of a ballot measure, et cetera. So it's really a great kind of one-stop shop for statewide ballot measures. Also, the California Secretary of State's office is another incredible resource. That is basically where you can go to know about your voter rights, your voter registration, statewide ballot measures, the eligibility requirements, the voter passage rates, et cetera. That's also, again, a great one-stop shop for anything election-based. And then the League of Women Voters is also a great resource for kind of bipartisan information to understand not only what's happening statewide, but also more specifically within your county or city. For Alameda County, the official election site of Alameda County, if you just type that into your web browser and tag along the word measures, that'll get you to all the measures that you're going to see in Alameda County. So whether you live in the city of Alameda, the city of Berkeley, Oakland, it'll list it all there. And I believe there is one measure, countywide measure, that will be on the ballot as well. So you can find all the information there. And then finally, in general, Ballotpedia is a great resource for really anybody in any state, but obviously since we're talking about California, Alameda County, and Oakland City, it's a great resource to also understand what your yes vote means, what your no vote means on a specific ballot measure. And you can also find some information on how a specific measure was funded, which if you're interested in understanding what interests are behind or what organizations are behind the campaign for or against a measure, Ballotpedia tends to track that information. So just another layer of transparency to what can be a very opaque process. Laura, is there any other resources that you want to share beyond what's on this slide?
I don't think so. I really liked the Alameda County one and Ballotpedia, but I think all of those are great. So I have nothing else.
Great, thank you. So with that, I'll say that we are hoping to share this recording to everyone who was registered for this event, as well as we're going to share it amongst our networks and families and communities, and we hope you do the same. We'll also share out a supplementary material that lists all these resources with the direct links, so that's really easy for you to share and visit yourself. So thank you so much for your time today. Laura, did you want to make a quick check? I can't tell if we have any other questions.
I was going to say, do we have any other questions?
Yeah.
Other than that?
Yeah, we'll maybe hang out for a minute or two to see if there are any other questions or comments.
Or yeah, comments. There's a long list of, ballot initiatives and measures on the docket this year. So it'll be a lively turnaround. We'll see what happens, see how turnout is.
Okay, is anything coming up for you? I can only see the slide in our faces.
Nope, I don't see any questions, so we can probably.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for the one question that was posed to us. That was a really good question. I encourage you to read more into Measure Q, because in no way are we experts, but that was our high level analysis of what we shared today. So again, thank you everyone for your time. We hope you are registered to vote and that you turn out for November 8th. Thank you so much.
Sounds good.